But how many times have we not prayed to God for something? A few days later, it goes away, and we're thinking, whew, that worked out well. And off we go. Not even acknowledging the fact that maybe God answered our prayer. How often we work a deal and we make money and we're thinking, man, I'm good. I know from my real estate days, man, I was like, man, I'm good. And somewhere along the way, it wasn't anything about, hey, God, thank you for giving me the knowledge and the skill and the ability to be able to do what I do. And often, because there's not a direct connection, we're quick to be able to kind of give credit to technology or credit to the skills of the doctors, or credit to the people around us, credit to my timing or being in the right place at the right time, or to just whatever fate or whatever we might say. We want to give it to that and not to where it really belongs, to God Himself. I mean, even not to pick on Steve Jobs, rest in peace kind of thing, but I mean, we had a discussion last week about that, thinking, well, right or wrong, but he came up with some ingenuity stuff that changed the way we do stuff, and it was amazing what he's done, and I totally agree. The gratitude goes to the fact that God gave him that knowledge. God, used a person like that in the birth and saving him from abortion and becoming adopted and all of that in the course of life, that here's a person that God used to be able to bring technology into this world that so many of us benefit from. And that's where the piece is often missing from the gratitude, that the praise goes to the person and not to the source that we're really talking about here. As a Christian, our life is to be a life of praise, thanking God for the things that He's done in our life. He's the one who deserves our praise, not us. Psalm 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." He's the one to say, God, thank you for my possessions. Thank you for my house. Thank you for my health. Thank you for my family. Thank you for my carpet. Thank you for all these things that you've blessed me with. That you've given me the skill to earn the income to be able to do it. That you've brought people in my life that have been the encouragement that helped me along the way. Thank you, God, for all that you have done. That's what the Christian life is really about. That we recognize the fact that we breathe because God gives us breath. Every one of us has an appointed time of death. We learned that a few weeks ago when we talked about the mask of success. That in fact, you can plan all you want, but the day will come where God says, this is it. God knows that day. There's nothing we're going to do to change that day. So every day we breathe is a gift of God. That He's given us another day to breathe. And it's important we not lose sight of that. To respond and to acknowledge where the real gratitude goes, the grace that God has shown to us in the way that we live. Gratitude, when we show gratitude, we're adequately honoring God for all He has done in our life. And that's the kind of awareness, acknowledgement that is a piece of this. And all of these, as I'm talking about these, you're going to see how they all kind of come together. But the first of it is to acknowledge that God is the source. He's the one who's done it. He's the one who gets the credit. Not any clever thing that I do. It is all God. And so then the second piece in this then is it expresses faith for what God is doing. So in this story, we see in the story that this man's gratitude is not just saying thank. He didn't come back just to say, hey, you know what? I couldn't find a card. They were out of them at the store, so I just wanted Jesus to say thanks. That wasn't what was going on here. He fell to his feet, praising Him and responding in this expression of gratitude far beyond just saying, all 10 of them came back and said thanks. A Christian, non-Christian can thank God for stuff. They do it all the time. But what happened more here in the level of gratitude was He said to him then in verse 19, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Jesus acknowledges that it's not just a man centered in his own life who's saying, hey, thanks a lot for that, Rabbi. But it's a man who acknowledges that out of faith he believes in who it is, the source that has healed him. He recognizes through this experience that Jesus Christ Himself is the one who has brought about this healing, and he wants to follow Him. we read through Scripture that when Jesus always talks about faith, it's usually connected with more of a spiritual healing that's taken place. And so maybe those 9 went off healed and they never got sick again. We don't really know what happened to them. And Jesus can heal people physically, and those can happen. But there was a greater level of healing that's expressed here out of faith. It's acknowledging the healing that is taking place internally, spiritually, eternally in the life of this person that's being described here. In the darkness that's around us, as I said, there's all kinds of healing that can happen, physical stuff. But there's only one thing that happens out of faith, and that's transformational healing. Restoring, as we talked about, light and darkness, bringing light into the darkness and restoring and bringing things back to the way that God intended them to be, to bring our life back to the level of order and honor in the way it was meant to be with God. What we acknowledge as Christians is that part of our gratitude is the fact that it's not like God, put us on a pedestal, fixed us, and said, hey, good luck on that, way to go. But it's the confidence of knowing that God continues to work in us, that any circumstance that happens in our life, we have no reason to fear. We can be content. We've talked about it in the past. We can just look at everything in life we're grateful for because God is using it to be able to better our life. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good for those who love God and have been called according to His purpose. And we are grateful to think about that. I mean, it's an expression that almost you don't want to say in times of trouble because you think it's so cliche. But how comforting is that to know that in spite of my circumstance, that anybody else in this world will think, man, your life, I wouldn't want it. We can respond in gratitude because we know that God is saying, I am using all of that for the greater good. Your good, the good of the kingdom, all of it is being used for better purposes. And so we can be grateful in that. And so then there's the faith that is an expression that comes out of that gratitude as well. And then the third is there's an expression of hope for what God will do. It's actually in a few weeks we're going to talk in a deeper level what that hope is about. And in this particular story, we don't know the end of the story, what happens later on. But again, based on the way his response was, falling to Jesus' feet, it was an act of, and praise is an act of following that, acknowledgement of who Jesus is, and he wants to follow him, to become a follower. In chapter 18, there's a story about another healing that Jesus took place, and he praises God, and again, an act of following that is a changing of his life that's taken place. I mean, it only takes a moment to think about this is a person who's been unwanted, rejected by all, lonely, untouchable, and now his life has been transformed. And he knows that it's not like, okay, that's it. Now I'm back to my path to death thing. But in fact, he's on a whole new path and a whole new life. And that commitment or dedication is wanting to respond in thanksgiving to God. Almost you can imagine this idea that my response will only be a drop in the bucket to what you have done for me, God. That for every breath I breathe and everything I do from this point on won't even come close to match or pay back what you have done for me. And so the response then is much more a response of the hope of what he knows that's going to come from this and what God is going to continue to do in his life that's going to take place. Many people in our world today, we welcome God stepping in, to bail us out and that kind of stuff. But we do not want him to step in when we don't want him to step in. We do not want him. The problem that often happens is we do not want him to take control of our life. We do not want to get in a position that I am willing to follow God no matter where he takes me. We don't want to be in a position where I now make choices that are not necessarily to meet my immediate desire or need, but rather I will make choices that I know honor God in all situations. And I will always respond in an act of obedience. God, the word obedience almost makes you think, And oftentimes people back off because that's what they don't want to do. They look for God as just kind of like a jumping in as a hero, fixing something, and then leaving. And that's the perfect world of what they'd want. Much like the 9 that were in the story here. But the control thing holds the people back. But for us as Christians then, we express a hope that God will continue to do what He's done. We express in our life a hope that Christ will return and we'll be with Him forever. We express in our life this hope that that God will make my life even more and more like Christ-like and the way it was intended to be, that my life will become full to the way it was designed from the beginning. And that God will continue to work in me and transform me and change me. And that becomes, everything that we do or say points to that. And that's what we look for. We see the future. Welcomingly, God in control. We would rather have God in control, leading us, guiding us, using us in any way that He chooses. Because we know that there's nothing I could do to be able to match what God has done for me. And so we can't help but express joy based on those experiences, to believe that, you look at the New Testament, the followers rejoicing in their suffering because they saw every moment of their life as a way that God was using it. It had purpose and had meaning. And the thought that out of gratitude for what Christ had done, the thought that Christ would say, I want to use you here, was almost overwhelming to them. As if someone would come into our life and do something of which we would be so eternally grateful, and then they would call you a couple days later and say, hey, you mind, I need to move a refrigerator. Seriously, would you respond by saying, you know what, I'm not into refrigerators. But hey, thanks for saving my life the other day. I just wanted to say that again. No, absolutely not. We would be honored to consider that they would want to be able to allow us to return the favor and response. And that's the way we live our life, is this hope of the belief that God is going to continue to use us, and out of response, that we weren't just out of a scrap heap, put on a pedestal somewhere on a wall in His living room of God's living room, and then it just sits there gathering dust. But rather, we are a tool that God uses, and we become a part of what God is doing. And the thought that He actually would say, Mark, you're still usable. In fact, it's those weird pieces of you that I really love and that make using you really special. When we live our life in that kind of gratitude, our life becomes a testimony. That's what we really see in this story. Again in chapter 18, that when people see the leper, and then 18 is the beggar, and what they were, and then what Jesus did, and now what they are, it says people respond in praise. They're amazed by the miracle of what God has done. And it's important for all of us to understand we are all lepers. The very fact that we might not connect with the lepers in this story is an indicating that I don't know that we fully appreciate to the level of gratitude that we should have. Sometimes you don't understand grace until you really need grace. Until you've been at the bottom to a place where you're thinking, there's nobody here that would even, if they knew who I was, again in the Mass, they would reject me. God knows who we are, and then He doesn't reject us, but in fact, He embraces us. And you experience that kind of grace and restoration from God. What you're really doing is you're acknowledging that it is all God. That's the beauty of these stories, is the fact that these aren't lepers who went out and figured it out. And Jesus said, if you can figure out how to get clean, you can come on my team and I'll use you. But in fact, they knew there is no way to be clean. It was a hopeless life, and Jesus healed them. Every one of us, at the deepest level of our life, are in a hopeless state without God. And Christ, through His death and resurrection, has come back and restored us. That's the grace that we have testimony to, and the response of gratitude for that.